What does the signing of Justin Houston mean for the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, as we cover the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we're back another Monday, and we're again creeping closer and closer to training camp football. It feels a little bit in the air right now, but I guess not totally because we haven't hit training camp yet. But once we do, we're going to be checking off those boxes. Training camp, and the preseason comes with training camp, and obviously the regular season. And there's a lot to like, a lot to be excited about this Ravens team. We'll talk about a lot of that here today. 3 different positional groups we'll touch on. In the second segment, the main meat of the show here, we're going to talk about Justin Houston, the signing the Ravens made late last week, or I'll call it a re-signing because he did play the year with the Ravens last year. It's a signing that many people expected to happen. It felt like once that UFA tender was placed on him, it seemed pretty likely that it would be not a done deal, but that he would end up back in Baltimore. So I'm glad it happened. We'll talk about what it means for that outside linebacker group, the defense, etc. in the second segment. In the first segment, we'll talk a bit about Lamar Jackson. And yeah, it's almost like a guess who, Lamar Jackson again type deal. Now, he was in the news for multiple reasons over the course of the weekend. And look, some of it was really, really good. And there was none bad, but some of it was really, really good. He had his fun day with LJ event, was able to reconnect with the kids back in Florida, in his community, which was really awesome to see. You know, all the kids there, they look up to him, which is a really, really cool thing. But he also changed his Instagram profile picture and his Twitter header to a picture of a girl from the movie How High, and it's a girl that says, "I need money." So obviously a lot of people took that and they said, oh, well, Lamar Jackson, it's a message to the Ravens and he's asking for money. And so everybody ran with that. But in an interview with USA Today, he said that was not the case. So we'll talk about that and just everything relating to Lamar Jackson over the weekend and a couple other things as well in the AFC North. And then also in the final segment, we'll be diving into the Ravens secondary a bit as Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Williams got high praise from their NFL peers, players, coaches, executives, and a couple of polls that ESPN ran. So we'll talk about those guys, the secondary that they have around Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Williams and more. So yeah, 3 different positional groups, quarterback, outside linebacker, cornerback / safety in those 3 segments. But let's dive into it here. If you're here with us today on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. It's a really awesome way to see this channel grow is by everyone subscribing to this channel and liking the video here on YouTube. It helps out a ton. Our next goal here on Locked On Ravens, 3,000 subscribers. If you're subscribed already, thank you so much. And if you haven't, you're wondering why we put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week here. So Ravens news, opinions, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards. We got it here for you. So be sure to subscribe on YouTube if you want that. And if you're with us in audio form, thank you as well. It's the same show, both audio and video, so you're not missing out either way you're watching or listening. Thank you for listening in audio form, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening on your way to work, from work, wherever. Thank you so much. Be sure to follow me on Twitter as well at KOstricker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk a bit about Lamar Jackson here. And again, his fun day with LJ event happened. And a lot of people came out to the event to see Lamar Jackson, to hang out with him, to have fun. And Lamar Jackson, we know how big of a community guy Lamar Jackson is, how much he loves giving back to his community, the communities around him, and just how giving of a person he is. And he talked a bit about it. You know, he had an interview with USA Today, which was a really good read. And actually, I wrote an article for USA Today about how all the clarification surrounding Lamar Jackson's social media picture changes to make sure that at least I could do my part to get the word out of what he said in this interview, that look, it wasn't about the Ravens. So going back to the whole thing, there were so many pictures, so many videos of the event of kids just having the time of their lives, Lamar Jackson having fun with them too. And one of my favorite quotes from this interview was not the fact that, you know, obviously the pictures or the social media stuff wasn't about the Ravens, but he was someone who really he showed his ability to give back very early on. This isn't just a new thing for him where it's like, oh, this is the first year he's doing this. Remember, he had the event last year, and there was so much, there was all this controversy about him running in slides and like all the difference of, well, how was he running in slides and risking generational wealth? And remember all those comments? Yeah, I sadly do. And it's all the narrative surrounding him. But he talked about how he was once one of those kids who looked up to his idols and wanted them to come back and give back. And now he is that person. He is now coming back to his communities, giving back, which is just such an amazing thing. But I know that it's unfortunate because, again, like the big story should have been, and we talked about this last year, the big story should have been Lamar Jackson and his amazing day with these kids giving back. But instead it turned into him changing his profile pictures, which again, fully in his right to do. Like it's totally okay that he did that. But then people took it and ran. And so in the interview, he did say that he said, quote, "They're making it seem like I'm talking to the Ravens when I'm not. Our contract discussion is going on already, but it ain't about that, though. I'm not putting my business life on social media. I won't ever do that. I won't put my personal life on social media. I'll show stuff, but I won't throw subliminal messages out. That's not me." And he also said, quote, "I don't know why people are blowing it up. I just saw Bleacher Report post it. They just take anything that's posted on social media and just blow it up and try to think for you. I don't take it too seriously." So, yeah, it's that same stuff. He said that, apparently he did it because he watched the movie, wanted to post the photo because he found it funny. That's what he said. That it's in the interview with USA Today. So that's what I'm going with. And I think that for Lamar Jackson, again, there's been so much made about so little in multiple different circumstances with him. And I know for a lot of people, and definitely himself, it gets tiring, I'm sure. I mean, to have every single thing that you do be put under a microscope. And look, it comes with the territory, but again, it's not like everybody deals with that kind of stuff, especially with the fame that Lamar Jackson has. Like, yes, your moves are going to be, put out there for the world to see, right? Like when you're a famous athlete, that's what happens. But for every little thing to be put in I don't know, it almost felt like it was getting twisted again into a negative light. I personally don't find it fair. I know, again, it must be frustrating for him. So I just wanted to do my part in putting out what he said in this interview. And again, trying to shed light on the fact that he did have this day with these children and made a lot of days and made a lot of weeks, months, years by having this event. So he did a great thing in his community. That's what the focus should be on. Also, we had a throwing session with a couple NFL wide receivers in Willie Snead, former Raven, also Robbie Anderson, who I know was one of the trio who asked Lamar Jackson for one of the signed jerseys after that Jets game where he had the Jets players lining up, right? That was a pretty famous moment during his huge 2019 MVP campaign. But yeah, those two guys, Snead's still the free agent. He spent some time last year with Oakland, with Carolina, but hasn't signed on with the team yet. But those are some South Florida wide receivers that he worked out with, and a lot of long balls being thrown. Jonah Schaefer had a good video he put out there. Jackson, posting some clips as well. And yeah, a lot of long balls, a lot of deep accuracy, which again, we saw Lamar Jackson be third in a lot of deep ball, well, in one of the deep ball categories, but he was in the top of a lot of deep ball categories. The Ravens wanted to push that ball down the field. I think they're going to do some more of that in 2022. I know that they did lose their deep threat in Marquise Brown, but I guess they're hoping they replace that with Devin Duvernay and maybe a couple other options on the roster, maybe a practice squad guy or two here and there. But the Ravens, I think they're going to try to push the ball down the field. Jackson has been working out hard all off season. He didn't show up for voluntary OTAs, but again, that was voluntary, as I've said time and time again on the show. So I think that when you're looking at Lamar Jackson, a very eventful weekend for him. Again, I don't know if it was nearly as, I don't know. I'm sure he didn't think it was going to be as eventful as it was with the whole social media thing, but he did have a really good day with the kids, it seemed like, during his event. So a big shout out to Lamar Jackson for always giving back to the community, being that person who people can look up to in the community based off of what he does and just what he shows overall. And again, all the contract discussions about, is it a message of the Ravens? Is it a message of the Ravens? He clearly stated that the conversations were ongoing. He clearly stated that he envisioned himself being in Baltimore for the rest of his career. The Ravens have made it clear that they want him in Baltimore. So, take those messages as you will too. And I think that it's a fair point to say, look, this is what's been said by both parties. These are the subliminal messages. I'm going to take what's being said and that is actually in words instead of trying to make something up about something that's, so it's a whole ordeal, but again, Lamar Jackson in the news there. And then finally, quickly, the Browns finally trading Baker Mayfield away. They get a conditional 5th rounder for the quarterback, trading to the Carolina Panthers. That'll be a week 1 match, but if Mayfield ends up starting between the Panthers and the Browns, and, for Deshaun Watson, that suspension still has not been handed down yet at the time of this recording. So that could be Jacoby Brissett versus Baker Mayfield in week 1. But Mayfield, he, for as up and down and as his tenure was in Cleveland, did give the Ravens some issues on multiple different occasions. Also, was someone who turned the ball over a little bit against the Ravens in a couple games. That game where Lamar Jackson had 4 interceptions, Mayfield himself was a turnover machine in that one. So, he's a player that I think a fresh start will benefit him. The situation in Cleveland was too toxic, but with the whole Baker Mayfield trade, the only 2 quarterbacks to remain with their former teams entering their 5th season from the first round of that draft in 2018 are Josh Allen in Buffalo and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. You have Baker Mayfield now in Carolina, Sam Darnold now in Carolina, and Josh Rosen. I could not tell you off the top of my head where Josh Rosen is right now. Atlanta still? I don't know. Don't quote me. I don't know where Josh Rosen is, but number 1, number 3, and number 10 are now on different teams. Number 7 and number 32 are still with their current team. So we'll talk more about this Ravens team in the second segment. We're going to be diving into Justin Houston, what that means to the Ravens coming up here on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline, and BetOnline.net is the number 1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. And you can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball. And how about them O's? 8 straight games there as we're talking, man. This Orioles team, the Magic, the Adley Rutschman Magic, we got, oh, man, it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be a Baltimore sports fan. A lot of excitement surrounding the Ravens, the Orioles, red hot right now. So if you want to bet on Orioles games or anything, go to BetOnline because it's your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. That's the website to use mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. I really do appreciate that. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube and follow us in audio form. But let's talk about Justin Houston. I'm excited about this one personally. It's one that if you had heard me back a couple of years ago, and even before I started hosting the show, I wanted Justin Houston in Baltimore in a bad way. In a bad way. I thought the fit would have been great. I thought he still had so much left in the tank. And this was before he signed with Indianapolis. So he signed with Indianapolis, and everybody thought, oh, he's washed. He's not going to be able to perform there. Well, guess what? His age 30 season, 2019 in Indianapolis, 11 sacks. Age 31 in 2020, had 8 sacks. So this was a player that again, when he became a free agent, I definitely wanted in Baltimore. Was over the moon ecstatic when he signed with the Ravens in 2021. I know Spencer Schultz and I talked a lot about that last year. And Kaji Ismail and I talked about it on Friday when he ended up signing with the team on Thursday. And so it's a 1-year deal for Houston. And this just made the most sense. Dating back to the start of free agency, the outside linebacker position was one that was decently weak overall. It definitely needed some additions to it, and whether that it was in the form of a re-signing or a trade or a free agent signing or a draft pick, there was some room for improvement, and obviously some of that improvement will come just by the improvement of some of the players, like Odafe Owe, second-year guy. I expect to have a huge breakout year. Dalen Hayes, injured for a lot of last year, right? Showed flashes, but injured for a lot of the year. I think he's going to have a huge year for the Ravens. Both those guys, both second-year players. But then after that, you were looking at, Vince Beagle and Stephen Mean, some undrafted guys like Jeremiah Moon and Chuck Wiley. So there was a little bit of depth concerns, especially if Owe and Hayes were to miss some time or something. And obviously a lot of this does depend on, and the whole reason we're having that they need depth conversation is because Tyus Bowser and David Ojabo both suffered torn Achilles injuries. Ojabo coming during his pro day in March, and Bowser happening week 18 against the Steelers. So you never know with those injuries. Will it be week 1? Will it be week 7? Will it be week 12? Will it be never during the 2022 season? There are a lot of varying factors there. So you have to operate, right? You have to operate worst case scenario, like they're not going to play at all. But then you have a best case scenario where it's okay, they'll be ready 100% by week 1. Maybe I'm probably anticipating somewhere in the middle. I'm no doctor, don't quote me, but maybe somewhere in the middle, maybe like a stint on the PUP list and then they come back or something. I know Ajabo's injury happened 2 months later, so maybe you tack on 2 months for Ojabo, but you never know. I hope both those guys come back, but In the case that they don't, Houston is a good veteran option. Now, I think Owe, and we talked about this on Friday on the show, I think Owe is still number one, the number one outside linebacker on this team. Houston does come in and slot in at number 2, though. Now, his season last year was underwhelming from a box score perspective. You look at the box score, 34 total tackles, 4.5 sacks. He had a fumble recovery, also had the forced fumble in there as well. But, 4.5 sacks was one of the lowest totals of his career. In fact, it was the second lowest total of his career. The lowest total came when he actually only played in 5 games and had 4 sacks. So if you want to count like almost fully healthy seasons, like Houston in 2016, 4 sacks in 5 games, right? That's still pretty good. Houston and Baltimore in 2021, 4.5 sacks in 15 games. Now, is Justin Houston 27 years old right now? No. That last year was his age 32 season. He's not the same player that he once was. But I think a lot that went unnoticed last year with Houston was his ability to impact the game beyond the box score. And it's something I talked about with Yannick Ngakoue during his time in Baltimore. There were a lot of, look, the fit was not good. The fit was not good between Ngakoue and Baltimore. And he acknowledged that. I acknowledge that. A lot of people acknowledge it. But he also was like a hair away or fingernail away from having probably 3 or 4 or 5 sacks or more sacks than he did when he was with the Ravens. And it was the same thing with Houston. He brought pressure. He has the ability to play the run. I don't know if you want to have him out there in those situations at this point. I feel like he's more of a situational pass rusher at this time. But if you need to have him out there on first down for an obvious run situation, you can do it. But, maybe in that situation, and we'll talk about this a little more in a few minutes, maybe that's an Owe and Malik Harrison down, where you might see Harrison move over to Sam a little bit, and then you can kind of work in from there. But Houston brings a lot. And the one of the bigger things, in my opinion, is the veteran presence. We had Odafe Owe calling him Yoda during last offseason, saying he has all this knowledge, and what was spreading it to a lot of different people, a lot of those young Ravens outside linebackers last season, and seemed to be very well liked in that locker room. And again, it keeps up with the value of Ravens culture. Talking about how him coming to Baltimore, there was a clip, I think it was on Ravens Wired, of him saying that Baltimore, he loved playing football there. And that was early on. It was the same thing with Marcus Peters too. He said that football brought his joy back. And I love watching that clip from Marcus Peters because it embodies what Baltimore football is about. It's success on the field and enjoying football off of the field, but not just football. It's enjoying life off the field, right? So I think that for Houston, he's a player that, again, won't be asked to play like 95% of snaps or anything. That's not his role right now. It's not his role anymore. He can thrive in a position. We've talked about this with Calais Campbell too, but these guys are still dominant players when they can have the right amount of rest. And I think that is where I'm looking for the Ravens. I mean, look, Calais Campbell last year played too many snaps, and part of that had to do with injuries. I get it, but he played by far the most snaps on the defensive line, and it was not particularly close. So when you're talking about Campbell, you're talking about Houston, those veteran type players, injuries willing, and hopefully that means no injuries. You're able to bring these guys in situational third down, obvious passing situations, while still having them be able to play a couple other different roles, right? I think the Ravens will still value versatility on the defensive side of the ball. But I think at the end of the day, bringing back Houston was a surefire thing for me, where I was like, yeah, this should get done. This should be the move that the Ravens make, or at least one of them. Because, again, you're bringing in a guy 1 year. I'm assuming it's around the $2 million range. Don't quote me. I don't know if the numbers have come out yet at the time of this recording. But I think that for what was left on the free agent market, the trade market, and the draft is obviously done, so you're not going to draft anybody yet until 2023, but it's a long ways away. I think for 1 year at least, Houston brings what the Ravens need. And I think that is stability at the position, somebody who I think can give them good games and good limited role, in a good limited role, because you're not, again, asking them to be this, oh, you're going to go out there and get us 15 sacks, and if you don't, our season's over. It's not what it is. He can go out there and get 5 sacks, and I think the Ravens will still be okay. Now, I expect more. I think this will be a better year from him from a box score perspective. The Don Martindale system didn't really favor sacks all that much, right? It wasn't a system where we saw a high output of sack totals from guys. Pressure was there sometimes, but again, sacks were inconsistent. Pressure numbers were sometimes inconsistent. So I'm hoping that will be better under Mike McDonald. But what it means for the outside linebacker position as a whole is, again, the Ravens now have an opportunity with their top 3 guys as Owe, Houston, and Hayes. That's a solid top 3. It's solid. Is it the best in the league? No, but it's solid. Then if you want to keep 5 guys there, assuming Tyus Bowser and David Ojabo go on the PUP list, You can choose, let's say, maybe one of the two veterans, either Vince Beagle or Steven Means, and you can choose one of the undrafted rookies, maybe Jeremiah Moon. So you're looking at, let's say the situation is Odafe Owe, Justin Houston, Dalen Hayes, Steven Means, and Jeremiah Moon. Let's say it's those five. That gives you a lot there. Now, it's not the same as if you're keeping five and Ajabo and Bowser are healthy. Then you're looking at a room that is Houston, Owe, Bowser, Hayes, and Ajabo. That is a deep group. But we're looking at the time in between now and Ajabo and Bowser coming back. So you got to put together what's there. I think for what that is, if the Ravens are hopeful that those guys will be able to return in like midway through the year, then they can kind of hold out. Maybe if they want to add another veteran, though, maybe it is Jason Pierre-Paul. That's someone they brought in for a visit. They now know a little bit more about him, so maybe that's an option. But they might just stick with their guys and trust their guys and see what happens. And we still have a long way to go before final rosters are set, right? We could see the preseason. They feel like they might need more. Then Pierre-Paul comes in, or they feel like they might be great, and they don't have to bring anybody in. So overall, the Houston signing, one that I think was a slam dunk home run, I gave it an A. There's no downside to it unless really the Ravens needed that money and he gets injured and doesn't play a game, and then the money's tied up in Houston and everything. But I really don't see a downside to it. Great locker room guy, good on the field guy, can provide you what you need in limited snaps. I think this was a great move for them. When we get back, we're going to be diving into the other moves that the Ravens made during this offseason, one of which was signing Marcus Williams. We'll talk about that signing and the praise that both him and Marlon Humphrey got from their NFL peers. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto, and this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it can be impossible for your local chain auto parts store to really stock all the parts you need, and sometimes there can be pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning. You got to wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer because they really only have the brand the warehouse happens to carry. But now you have computers access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. And why you should use Rock Auto is because you can save a ton of time and money. They're a family business. Their prices are super, super low for every customer. And you can explore the easy-to-use website today for your solution to your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now and see the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On. There, how'd you hear about us? By saying we sent you amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And let's talk secondary. But first, be sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On NFL, where I hosted the Monday show over there. Again, we talked about Baker Mayfield with the hosts of Locked On Browns and Locked On Panthers. I talked about Justin Houston, gave Justin Houston some national love on the national show for our network. So be sure to check that out. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow us in audio form. But yeah, secondary time. Let's talk about this secondary. We know in 2021 what this secondary was. Not ideal, I would say. A lot of miscommunication issues, missed tackles, just blown assignments overall. Not a great year from the secondary. Marlon Humphrey had a down year from what we have become expected of him. One of the best corners in the game. And really, he struggled in 2021. And I think now when looking at what they have added versus what they have lost, I think there are clear upgrades that have been made. Marlon Humphrey in there is the number one corner, but he's a guy coming back. You also have Marcus Peters coming back. Both those guys ended the season on injured reserve. The Ravens got no games out of Marcus Peters last year, unfortunately, due to his ACL injury. Humphrey ended up tearing his pec and missed the final couple games of the year. So you're getting two at least top 15 corners, in my opinion, back in this game. You also added in Kyle Fuller, who, again, does have to bounce back from his Denver year last year. Was not a great year from him. Got benched on a couple of occasions, but they have that veteran option there, a Maryland native, so that's really cool as well. You add in a couple of young guys, couple rookies, Jalen Armour-Davis and Pepe Williams. Safety position, you lose to Sean Elliott there, and I guess I should say corners. They lost Anthony Averett, Tavon Young, Chris Westry, Khalil Dorsey, so they did lose some guys there, but in the safety room, again, the Sean Elliott departs for Detroit. You bring in Marcus Williams. That is a massive upgrade in terms of durability. I know I loved Sean Elliott in Baltimore. I loved that pick when it happened. But again, injuries just didn't work out. But Marcus Williams comes in and is super durable. One of the best young safeties in this game. They draft Kyle Hamilton, another guy who should be one of the best young safeties in this game by the end of the year. And then you still have Chuck Clark, and you still have Tony Jefferson. You brought back Geno Stone. You have other depth such as Brandon Stevens or Darius Washington, who can play both corner and safety. So I'm loving the secondary depth they have, but in some ESPN polls, Jeremy Fowler put these out. These polls were done by NFL players, NFL executives, coaches. Some top 10 rankings came out, and both Humphrey and Williams got some love on those rankings, both coming in at number 8. So they did the top 10 safeties, the top 10 corners, and both Humphrey and Williams came in at number 8. And I think that, for a guy like Humphrey, I'm sure that the reason that he is 8 in this situation, like I personally, I don't think there are 8 corners better than Marlon Humphrey. I don't. I think Humphrey's a top 5 corner, but I think that you look at his year last year, I think that's what people see. And it's like we talk about with Lamar Jackson. The what have you done for me now lately? Jackson's end of the year last year before he got injured, starting the Miami game and going on, wasn't as impressive as his beginning of the year. So people, I think that's what they remember. And it's unfortunate because the beginning of his year, I think, was really, really good. For Humphrey, the beginning of his career, I mean, outside of last season, was amazing. Top 3, top 2, top 1 cornerback material, depending on where you rank him. But last year, it just was not. You can't look away from that fact. So I think that's what people see. They see the other top guys like Jalen Ramsey and Jair Alexander and all these players, and they say, well, Humphrey didn't have a great year, so let's knock him down a little bit until he can show what he can do. And I think he's going to show what he can do. I think that's the reason he's number 8. I don't think he's number 8 in this league. I think he's a top 5 corner still, even with the year he had last year. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. And Williams being at number 8, I mean, look, he's an up-and-coming player. He's 25 years old. He's somebody who this is his first big NFL contract here, played for 5 years in New Orleans, a ball-hawking type player, sneaky physical. I don't want to leave out the physicality because it is sneaky physical, some of the stuff that he brings to the table, a hard-hitting guy. But I love what this team can do now with so many versatile pieces in the secondary. You can bring these guys up to the line. You can play them in the deep part of the field. You can use 6 DBs on the field, 3 safety looks, Marlon Humphrey in the slot, Marlon Humphrey on the outside. You can put all these different guys in so many different places. It's something Don Martindale loved to do, right? I mean, I'll never forget it. First series of the Cleveland game in 2020. I think literally third play. It was a third down. Calais Campbell drops back into coverage from the defensive line position and almost picks off Baker Mayfield. I mean, it's the things like that where the Ravens value that versatility. I'm not saying Calais Campbell's going to be lining up in the slot or anything. Like, maybe that'd be fun for a play. I don't know if it goes super well, but I think that what the Ravens love in terms of versatility, you have it with Humphrey, you have it with Williams. If you want to talk about Hamilton, you talk about it with Clark. Marcus Peters can do a couple different things as well. But I think for the other guys, such as the depth pieces, Brandon Stevens, Ardarius Washington, Tony Jefferson, you have so much in that secondary. Plus, if you just look at the pure additions versus subtractions, we did this, I think, a couple months ago, or maybe it was a month ago. Pure additions versus subtractions, you add in Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton, Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, Kyle Fuller. You subtract Deshaun Elliott, Anthony Averett, Tavon Young, Chris Westry, Khalil Dorsey. I'm taking Team A. I'm taking the additions in that situation because look, Anthony Averett was solid over his time in Baltimore. Wasn't perfect. Did have some things he had to work on, but in the trade-off 1-for-1, if Fuller has a bounce back here, I'm taking Fuller. Deshaun Elliott versus Marcus Williams 100%. Kyle Hamilton versus some of the cornerback depth you got there. I'm taking Kyle Hamilton. And I had talked about the 3 safety looks in 2021, and I thought it could work with Elliott and Chuck Clark and a guy like I talked about Trey Boston a lot. I thought that it could have worked with those guys. The Ravens don't ultimately bring in a guy like Trey Boston. Elliott kind of goes in and out and obviously gets hurt in the middle of the year and misses the rest of that season. And the secondary just has all kinds of issues. There was never really a sense of continuity with that secondary in 2021. There wasn't. So I think this year with hopefully more durable players, hopefully the injury gods do not strike the Ravens like they did last year, because that would be that'd be another tough year. But I think that with the changes the Ravens have made, and even if they're just super subtle ones, I hope that this will be a year for the secondary to bounce back. I think on paper, and I've said it before, this is not new, I think the Ravens have the best secondary in the NFL. I do. On paper, when you balance out star power with depth and quality depth at that, I think the Baltimore has the best secondary in the NFL. There are a lot of challengers, but I think that if you're having, and according to the peers, right, the NFL peers, you have Humphrey as a top 10 corner, you have Williams as a top 10 safety, you have Peters in there as well, you have Hamilton, you have Clark, and all the guys we talked about. I think that 100% means that this team has the top secondary in the NFL on paper. Now, you have to translate it over. It can't just be on paper. You have to put it together on the field. But it makes me excited because for what we saw in that secondary last year, some issues did get cleaned up. We didn't see as many miscommunications. We didn't see as many missed tackling issues in that secondary as the year progressed. But if the Ravens can start off that way and continue that way for the entire season, it will set a precedent and it will be a much better year for them. So I'm excited about the defense. I'm excited about the secondary and the additions that they have made there with 2 top 10 players, according to the peers that put out those polls on ESPN via Jeremy Fowler. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.